Good morning. This is Ron. Welcome to Story Time. And today is Thursday, February the 1st, and I am reading part 2 of The Left's War on Free Speech. And on Tuesday, we covered the first part, which basically talked about how and when the issue of abridging free speech started, which was back in January of 2010, and also it went into some of the tactics that were used by the left in suppressing free speech since 2010. And now, part 2 of the left's war on free speech. Prosecutors also conducted pre-dawn raids on some of their targets' homes. In one horrifying instance, the target of such a raid was on an out-of-town trip with his wife, and their teenage son was home alone. Law enforcement came into the house and sequestered the boy, refusing to allow him to call a lawyer or even his grandparents, who lived down the road. They hauled items out of the house, and as they left, they told the boy that he too was subject to the gag order, that if he told anyone what happened to him, he could go to jail. We only learned of this because one brave target of the probe, Eric O'Keefe, told the Wall Street Journal what was going on. We broke that story and it became a national headline news, but it ultimately took a lawsuit in the Wisconsin Supreme Court to shut down the probe. In its ruling, the court made clear its view that the probe's purpose had been intimidation. The prosecutors had been sending the message, if you dare to speak, we will turn your lives into a living hell and potentially put you in prison. More recently, we have seen this tactic in the joint action of 17 state attorneys general who launched a probe into Exxon and some 100 different groups that have worked with Exxon over the years. The implicit prosecutorial threat, get on board with our climate change agenda or we might bring racketeering charges against you. A third intimidation tactic is for activist groups to use blackmail against corporations and nonprofits in order to silence them. One subject of such attacks was the American Legislative Exchange Council, a group that works to promote free market policies at the state level. As a nonprofit, it is largely funded by corporate donations. Because it is so successful, it has long been despised by left-wing activist groups. These groups focused their efforts on ALEC in 2012. In the wake of the tragic shooting of the 17-year-old Trayvon Martin in Florida, ALEC had provided a tangential role in crafting the popular Stand Your Ground laws that the left attacked after the shooting. On that basis, left-wing activists branded ALEC a racist organization and threatened to run ad campaigns against its corporate donors, branding them as racist too, unless they stopped funding ALEC. In a coordinated action, Democratic U.S. Senator Dick Durbin sent letters to 1,000 organizations across the country demanding to know if they supported ALEC and suggested they get hauled in front of Congress if they did. ALEC lost nearly half of its donors in the space of a few months. We've also seen this tactic employed against private individuals. One such person was Idaho businessman Frank Vandersloot, who Barack Obama's re-election campaign singled out in 2012 following a Vandersloot donation to Mitt Romney. The campaign publicly branded him a disreputable person, painting a target on his back. Not long after that, Vandersloot was audited by the IRS and visited by other federal agencies. Out in California, left-wing activists targeted donors to the state's Prop 8 ballot initiative, which supported traditional marriage. They combed through campaign finance records and put the names and addresses of Prop 8's donors on a searchable map. Citizens on this list had their cars keyed, their windows broken, and their small businesses flash mobbed, and in their voicemails and emails flooded with threats and insults. Some of them even lost their jobs, most notably Brendan Eich, the founder and CEO of Mozilla. In later depositions, many of these targets told lawyers that they wouldn't donate to future ballot initiatives, so the attacks were successful in silencing them. Note the use of disclosure in these attacks. We have come to associate transparency and disclosure with good government, but unfortunately, our system of disclosure has been turned on its head. Disclosure was supposed to enable citizens to keep track of politicians, but if you follow Hillary Clinton's server scandal, you know that politicians have now become expert at hiding their business. Instead, disclosure is increasingly becoming a tool by which government and political thugs identify people and organizations who oppose them. Sadly, our federal judiciary has refused to honor important precedents that protect anonymity in politics, most notably the famous 1958 case NAACP v. Alabama. In that case, a unanimous Supreme Court ruled against the Alabama Attorney General who had demanded a list of the state's NAACP members. The civil rights group knew this was tantamount to making targets of its members in a state that was riven at the time with race-related violence. The court held that some level of anonymity is sometimes required to protect the rights of free speech and free assembly. The court expanded on this precedent until the Watergate scandal, when it, too, got caught up in the disclosure fad. Political privacy rights have been eroding ever since. What is to be done? For starters, we need to be aware that this is happening and that it is not random. The intimidation game is very real. It is the work of left-wing groups and politicians. It is coordinated and it is well honed. Many of the targets of intimidation who I interviewed for my recent book weren't aware of what was happening to them, and that allowed the intimidation to go on for too long. Awareness is key. We need to think hard about the ways to limit the powers of the administrative state to stop rogue agents at the IRS and other agencies from trampling on free speech rights. We can make great progress simply by cutting the size of federal and state bureaucracies. But beyond that, we need to conduct systemic reviews of agency powers and strip from unaccountable bureaucracies any discretion over the political activities of Americans. The IRS should be doing what it was created to do, making sure taxpayers fill out their forms correctly. Period. We need to push corporations to grow backbones and to defend more aggressively their free speech interests, rather than leaving that defense to others. We need to overhaul our disclosure laws and once again put the onus of disclosure on government rather than citizens. At the moment, every American who donates $200 or more to a federal politician goes into a database. Without meaning to sound cynical, no politician in Washington is capable of being bought off for a mere $200. We need to raise that donation threshold. And there is good reason to force disclosure of any donations, and we need to think hard about whether there is good reason to force disclosure of any donations to ballot initiatives or to the production and broadcast of issue ads, ads designed to educate the public rather than to promote or oppose candidates. Most important, we need to call out intimidation in any form and manner when we see it, and do so instantly. Bullies don't like to be exposed. They'd rather practice their ugliness in the dark. And one lesson that emerged from all my interviews on this topic was that speaking out works. Those who rolled over merely set themselves up for future attacks. Those who called out the intimidators maintained their rights and won the day. Finally, conservatives need to tamp down any impulse to practice such intimidation themselves. Our country is best when it is engaged in vigorous debate. The framers of the Constitution envisioned a multiplicity of interests that would argue their way to a common good. We succeed with more voices, not fewer, and we should have enough confidence in our arguments to hear out our opponents. And that's the end of The Left's War on Free Speech by Kimberly Strassel, author of The Intimidation Game, How the Left is Silencing Free Speech, from the April 2017 issue of Imprimis, Volume 46, Number 4, a publication of Hillsdale College. And if you want to have for comments and whatnot, please go to my blog, which is www.ronaldhardgrove.blogspot.com. So until tomorrow, in which case I will be treating you to a Storytime Extra, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.